Every morning at exactly 6:47, Vera Hutchins carried 2 cups of coffee to the same bench at the edge of Millbrook Park in Cedar Falls, Iowa. She always set the second cup on the armrest to her right, never on the ground, never on the backrest. Always the armrest, tilted just slightly so the heat wouldn't escape too fast through the lid. She sat there for exactly 40 minutes, sometimes longer if the morning was quiet enough. She drank her coffee. She watched the joggers pass. She watched the pigeons argue over something invisible in the grass. And she watched the second cup grow cold. No one asked about it. People in Cedar Falls were polite that way. The kind of polite that meant they noticed everything and said nothing. Vera was 38 years old. She had a daughter in 2nd grade named Poppy. No, wait. Her daughter's name was Avery. 6 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, obsessed with the color orange, and a stuffed rabbit named Captain, who had lost one eye sometime in the move from their old apartment on Birch Street. That move had happened 14 months ago. Vera still hadn't told Avery why they left so suddenly. Avery hadn't asked, which either meant she understood more than a 6-year-old should, or she trusted her mother completely. Vera wasn't sure which possibility felt heavier. She worked the early shift at a laundromat on 5th called Clean Slate. A name she had once found funny, back when she still found things funny with any regularity. She started at 5:30 in the morning, which meant she was up by 4:45, which meant she ran on 6 hours of sleep on a good night and far less on the others. After her shift, she walked Avery to school, then picked up whatever hours she could at the sandwich counter, 3 blocks down, which was owned by a man named Phil, who was not unkind but who also never offered benefits, and paid just enough to make her feel like quitting would be stupid. She wasn't complaining. That was the thing people misunderstood when they looked at her. She wasn't sitting on that bench feeling sorry for herself. She was just sitting. The second cup of coffee was for her husband Denny Hutchins, who had worked the line at a packaging plant outside of town, and who had terrible taste in movies and who always burned the bottom of the grilled cheese because he got distracted, and who had died 18 months ago on a Tuesday in March, when a forklift malfunctioned on the warehouse floor, and the whole sequence of events that followed happened so fast that by the time anyone called Vera, there was nothing left to do but drive to a hospital she had never been to before, and sit in a room that smelled like floor cleaner while someone with kind eyes told her something she already somehow knew. She still bought him a coffee. She knew it was the kind of thing that would concern people if they knew. She wasn't confused about reality. She understood that Denny was gone. She just hadn't figured out yet what to do with her hands at 6:47 in the morning. And the coffee gave them something to hold. She always threw the second cup away on her way out of the park. That was the routine. That had been the routine for 11 months. Until the Tuesday that a boy named Fletcher sat down next to her. He was maybe 8 years old. Small for his age, with ears that stuck out just enough to give his face a permanently startled look. He was wearing a red jacket that was too thin for October, and carrying a backpack that was clearly too heavy. The kind that leaned him backward just slightly when he walked. He sat at the other end of the bench from her, not asking permission, not acknowledging her at all, and pulled a granola bar from his pocket. He ate it in 6 bites while watching the same pigeons Vera had been watching. She glanced at him and then away. After a moment, he looked at the second cup of coffee. "Is someone sitting here?" he asked. "No," Vera said. He nodded slowly, like that answer required processing. Then he went back to the pigeons. They sat in silence for about 4 minutes before he said, without turning his head, "That's a lot of coffee for one person." Vera looked at the cup. "I know." Another silence. "My grandma used to make 2 cups every morning," he said. "One for her and one for my grandpa." Even after he was gone, he paused. She said it helped. Vera turned to look at him properly for the first time. He was still watching the pigeons, chewing the last corner of his granola bar with the focused expression of someone much older. "Did it?" she asked. "Help?" He thought about it for a second. "She seemed okay," he said. "Eventually." Then a woman's voice called from somewhere near the park entrance. "Fletcher, come on, we're late." And the boy hopped off the bench, yanked his enormous backpack up onto his shoulders, and jogged away without saying goodbye. Vera watched him go. She looked at the second cup. She didn't throw it away until she was almost at the park gate, which was later than usual, and she held it in her hand the whole walk there. Cedar Falls in October was the kind of cold that announced itself before it arrived, the kind that made the air smell like wood smoke and dead leaves. 2 weeks before the temperature actually dropped. Vera liked it. She had grown up in Phoenix, and for years the changing seasons had felt like a gift she wasn't sure she deserved. Now they just felt like time passing, which was its own kind of gift, she supposed. Avery had a cold that week and Vera had to take her to school anyway. because she couldn't afford to miss her shift at the laundromat. She felt the particular guilt of that every time. She felt Avery's warm forehead in the morning and watched her small shoulders hunch, in a way that meant she was tired and didn't want to get dressed. Vera made her oatmeal and put exactly 3 chocolate chips on top because that was the number Avery had decided was correct, and she packed an extra juice box and a note in her lunchbox that said, "You are tough. Love, Mom," because she was. Avery was the toughest person Vera knew, and she was 6, and Vera wasn't sure how to feel about that. She didn't see Fletcher at the park for 3 days. On the 4th morning he was back, same bench, same tooth and jacket, same enormous backpack. He was already there when she arrived, which surprised her. He had a different granola bar this time. Chocolate chip, from the looks of it. And he was reading something on a small tablet that had a cracked corner on the screen. He looked up when she sat down, nodded once, like they were colleagues arriving for a shift, and went back to his tablet. She set both cups down, drank hers. The second one steamed gently in the cold air. "Your grandma," Vera said after a while. "Is she still alive?" Fletcher looked up. "Yeah, she lives in Dubuque now, with my uncle. Do you see her often?" "At Thanksgiving," he shrugged. "She smells like cinnamon." Vera smiled. It happened before she decided to. Fletcher noticed. He didn't say anything about it, but she saw the small shift in his expression. Something that wasn't quite a smile back, more like a quiet satisfaction, like a person who had made a careful bet and watched it pay out. "What grade are you in?" she asked. "3rd. He held up the tablet. "We're doing a project about community helpers. I have to interview someone, like a firefighter? Or anyone," he said. "My teacher said it could be anyone who helps people in their community." He looked at her. "What do you do?" "I work at a laundromat." He considered this seriously. "That's helpful," he said. "People need clean clothes." "They do," Vera agreed. He typed something on the tablet. She realized, slowly, that he was taking notes. "Do you like it?" he asked. She thought about the 5:30 mornings and the smell of detergent that never fully washed out of her hair, and the way the dryer's sound became a kind of white noise she couldn't sleep without anymore. "Some days," she said honestly. He typed that too. They sat for another 10 minutes. The park was filling up around them, dog walkers and joggers and a group of older men who played chess at the stone tables near the fountain. Fletcher finished his granola bar and packed the wrapper carefully in the front pocket of his backpack. He stood up and yanked the straps onto his shoulders. "She used to tell me," he said, adjusting the weight, "that the second cup wasn't about him anymore. It was about her, that it was something she did for herself, not for him." He paused. "I don't know if that makes sense." Vera looked at the second cup. "It does," she said quietly. Fletcher gave that same small nod, like something had been confirmed, and walked away toward the park gate. Vera sat with both cups for another few minutes after he was gone. She didn't tell anyone about Fletcher, not her neighbor Judy, who watched Avery after school 3 days a week and who was generous with her time in a way Vera tried not to take for granted. It felt like the kind of thing that would change in the telling. Either it would sound too small to explain, or it would sound like more than it was, and she didn't want either. But she thought about what he'd said. The second cup wasn't about him anymore. It was about her. She turned that over during the long quiet stretches at the laundromat, feeding sheets into the fold and press while the machines ran their cycles. She turned it over in the shower, at 4:50 in the morning, before Avery woke up, standing under water that never got quite hot enough, in their apartment, because the building was old and the water heater was older. She hadn't let herself think about Denny in a while, not directly. She let herself feel the shape of his absence. She felt it every morning with the second cup. Every time Avery asked why Daddy's picture was on the shelf, instead of in a frame she could reach. But she hadn't let herself sit with the actual memory of him. It felt like something that might undo her if she looked at it too directly. The way you're not supposed to look at a solar eclipse. She found herself, one night after Avery was asleep, sitting at the kitchen table with Denny's old coffee mug in her hands. The one that said "World's Okayest Husband," which she had given him as a joke their second anniversary, and which he had used every single morning until the one when he didn't come home. She hadn't used it since. She'd kept it on the highest shelf where she could see it but couldn't accidentally reach for it in a tired half-awake moment. She sat with it for a long time. She wasn't crying. She was just sitting with it. The way you sit with a thing you've been afraid to touch. And she thought, he would have found Fletcher hilarious. He would have come home that first Tuesday and said, "You'll never believe the kid I talked to today." Even though she would have been the one who talked to him. And Denny would have wanted a... What was in the backpack? What kind of granola bar? What exactly he said about the grandmother? Denny was always more interested in people than he let on. He had that thing where he seemed like he wasn't paying attention. And then later he'd say something that proved he'd been paying attention to everything. She held the mug and let herself miss him in a way she hadn't in a long time. It hurt differently than she expected. Not less, but differently. More like something opening than something breaking. She saw Fletcher's mother that Friday. She had seen a woman dropping him off before, at the park entrance, which had struck her as slightly unusual. Most parents dropped kids at school, not parks. But she hadn't thought about it much. That Friday, the woman came into the park herself, walking briskly in a nurse's uniform, with her hair still in a work bun, and she stopped when she saw Vera because Fletcher, who was already on the bench, had clearly pointed her out. "Hi," the woman said. She was maybe 40, with Fletcher's same startled ears and steady eyes. "I'm Miriam Okafor, Fletcher's mom." She glanced at her son, who was watching them with elaborate casualness, and then back at Vera. "I'm sorry if he's been bothering you." "He hasn't," Vera said, and meant it. Miriam sat on the edge of the bench on the other side of the second cup, hands in her jacket pockets. "He told me about you. And about the coffee." She paused. "He also told me you're doing a hard thing." Vera looked at Fletcher. He was studying his tablet like he had no idea what was happening. "He's not wrong," she said. Miriam nodded. "I'm a nurse at the hospital on Linden," she said. "The night shift, usually. So Fletcher gets dropped here some mornings before school because my route's past the park, and the school doesn't open until 8. She shrugged. "He's always been fine on his own for a while. Very self-sufficient." "I noticed," Vera said. Miriam looked at her with the particular directness of someone who had worked in hospitals long enough to have stopped being afraid of uncomfortable truths. "He also said you're raising a daughter alone, and that you work 2 jobs. She paused. "I just wanted to say, there's a thing at the hospital not many people know about it, a fund for families in situations like yours. It's not much, but it covers childcare costs, sometimes groceries. I'm not trying to, I just thought you should know it exists." Vera opened her mouth and then closed it. "I don't usually tell people things like that before I even know their name," Miriam said, and smiled for the first time, a small tired smile. "What's your name?" "Vera," she said. "Vera Hutchins." Miriam pulled out her phone and typed something. "I'll text you the contact for the fund coordinator. Her name is Janet. She's good." She looked at Vera steadily. "You don't have to use it. I just think you should have the option." Vera thought about saying she was fine. She almost did. It would have been easier. Instead, she said, "Thank you." Miriam stood, squeezed Vera's hand once. The practiced, confident grip of someone who held people's hands professionally, and walked back toward the park entrance. She stopped to ruffle Fletcher's hair as she passed him. He ducked and fixed his hair with great dignity. Vera watched him. He turned and looked at her with those startled-looking ears and that careful expression. "She worries," he said, by way of explanation. "She should," Vera said. "She sounds like a good mom." Fletcher thought about this. "She is," he said. "She also makes terrible sandwiches, but I don't tell her that." Vera laughed. "A real one. The kind that catches you off guard and sounds too loud and that you can't quite stuff back in once it's out." Fletcher looked quietly pleased. The text from Miriam came that evening, just a name and a phone number and, "Janet knows who you are. You can call whenever you're ready. No pressure." Vera stared at it for a long time. She thought about the word ready. She had been operating for 18 months on the assumption that ready was a feeling you waited for. A door you stood in front of until something unlocked it from the other side. She had been waiting, and in the meantime she had kept going. The laundromat, the sandwich counter, the oatmeal with 3 chocolate chips, the 647 bench, the second cup. And she had told herself that the going was enough for now. She called Janet the next morning. Janet had a voice like someone who had given difficult information to a lot of people and had figured out the exact register that made it land softly. She walked Vera through the process without making it feel like a process. She mentioned a childcare subsidy and a grocery assistance program, and a thing she called a bridge fund that could help with the gap between Vera's income and what Cedar Falls actually cost to live in. She didn't ask Vera to justify herself or explain her circumstances in detail. She just said, "We're here for people who are making it work and just need a little less to work against." Vera had to put the phone down for a second because her throat closed in a way she hadn't expected. She made it work. That was exactly what she was doing, and she hadn't had anyone say it out loud like that in a long time. She called back and said yes. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, Vera arrived at the bench at 6:47 and set both cups down. The air had gotten properly cold now, the kind of October cold that was edging toward November, and she had finally bought Avery a new winter coat. Something she had put off because of the cost. but the childcare subsidy had freed up just enough that she'd gone to the thrift store on Oak and found a purple one in almost perfect condition. Avery had put it on in the store and refused to take it off. Fletcher arrived 2 minutes after Vera, which had become the usual rhythm. He dropped his backpack, still enormous, and sat down on his end of the bench. He had finally gotten a slightly warmer jacket, navy blue. "You look different," he said. "Do I?" He looked at her the way he looked at everything, straightforwardly, without apology. "Not sad," he said. "Well, less sad." She picked up her coffee. "I called Janet." He nodded like this was expected news. "Good. You knew about the fund?" "My mom talks about it sometimes," he said. "She talks about a lot of things when she thinks I'm not listening." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a different kind of granola bar. "Berry, from the looks of it. I always listen." Vera believed that completely. They sat for a while. The chessmen were already at their tables near the fountain. The joggers passed in their morning loops. A woman walked by with 2 dogs who were arguing about the direction. "Fletcher," Vera said. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "That first day, when you sat down, did your mom tell you to?" He took a bite of his granola bar and chewed for a moment before answering. "No," he said. "She told me to leave people alone if they seemed like they wanted to be alone." Another bite. "But you didn't look like you wanted to be alone. You looked like you'd just forgotten that you didn't have to be." Vera was quiet for a second. "You're 8 years old," she said. 8.5, he said with some emphasis. She laughed again. The kind that came from somewhere lower than her chest. Somewhere she hadn't accessed in a while. It didn't sound too loud this time. It sounded like something finding its right size. Fletcher finished his granola bar, folded the wrapper, tucked it away. "My project got a good grade," he said. "The one about community helpers." "What did you write about?" He shrugged, already pulling his backpack straps on. "You the laundromat." He stood up. "And the coffee." He glanced at the second cup. "I said it was an act of love that someone kept doing every day even when it was hard. My teacher said that was a very mature observation." Vera looked at the second cup. She picked it up. She held it in her right hand instead of her left, which was a small thing and probably didn't matter. "It is," she said. Fletcher nodded once and walked toward the gate. She watched him go, backpack tilting him backward in that familiar way, jacket zipped all the way to his chin against the October air. She drank her coffee. She let the second one sit beside her, steaming in the cold, until the last of the heat was gone. And then she stood, picked up both empty cups, and walked out of the park. Path than usual. Not the habit-grooved route she had walked for 11 months. But the longer way around, through the center of the park where the fountain ran, and the chessmen argued quietly, and the light came through the trees at an angle that made everything look, just briefly, like something worth paying attention to. She was going to be late picking up Avery. She walked a little faster, and the cold air felt clean in her lungs. And somewhere ahead of her a day was waiting that she had not yet had a chance to ruin, or save, or simply live through. And she thought, that's something. That's something after all.